In this lecture, it's time to create actions and action maps. The process is very simple. To get started, we must create an input action asset. Actions are stored in a single file. By keeping it in a file, we can reuse our actions across multiple scenes. To keep our project organized, let's create a folder for storing the core files of our game. In the Assets directory, create a new folder. The name of the folder should be called Core. Next, open the Create menu. Under this menu, search for an option called Input Action. Click on this option to create a new input action asset. Let's set the name to Game Controls. This file will contain the entire list of actions that can be performed within our game. We can edit the list by double-clicking on the file. A new window should appear called Input Actions. Let's merge this window with the Scene and Game windows. This window allows us to modify an input action asset. It's split into 3 sections. We have Action Maps, Actions, and another section for additional settings. The first step is to create an action map. As mentioned before, all actions must be associated with an action map. We can press the plus button to create a new action map. After pressing this button, we must assign a name. Let's set the name to Gameplay. Our first action map will be related to the player. We can click on the action map to begin adding actions. By default, we are provided an action for demonstration purposes. It's safe to delete this action from the action map. Next, we can add a new action by pressing the plus button. The name of our action will be called Move. Nested inside the action is a binding. Bindings won't be reviewed in this lecture. Let's remove the binding from the action. Congrats! You've created your first action. Let's create the rest of our actions for our game. The game we're developing will have a combat system, health system, and dialogue system. Let's define actions for each of these systems. Press the plus button again. This time, the name of the action will be called Interact. In a future lecture, the player will be able to talk with NPCs. To initiate a conversation, the player must press a button on their controller. This action will be associated with this part of the game. Next, let's create another action for attacking called Attack. Add another action for healing called Heal. Let's add one more action to pause the game. The name of the action will be called Pause. Lastly, you can delete the bindings from each of these actions. There's one last step before moving on. Keep in mind, the actions are stored in a separate file. The Input Actions window provides an editor for modifying the file. Like most files, we need to save the changes. At the top of the window, click the Save Asset window. Alternatively, you can check the Auto Save option. Either solution works. After saving the asset, we can move on to the next step. In the next lecture, let's take on an exercise.